as per usual, I have my tea. This time it's the Boston Harbor tea, and I tried putting some lemon in it, so we'll see if that works out. I was a little bit apprehensive, just with the idea of, well, oh, it's American tea, and I'm doing it the English way with lemon, but hey, if it's good, it's good. So we'll see. We'll get to that. But as I mentioned prior, and I am very excited for what I have planned today. I'm sure you can the uh, read the title. We are going to be doing a deck tech for a deck of mine that I built. I put it up on Moxfield, which I am liking their software. I'm not. This is not a paid promotion. Why would they pay me? But I am enjoying their. I do like their software. There's some things I would prefer worked a little differently, but sure. It's a good way of storing stuff, and I will make this deck list public. I'll put it into the description of the video if YouTube ever lets me put links to outside sources in my video descriptions. It's supposed to take like 2 months. It's been more than that. In any case, yeah, we'll be doing a deck tech. So this deck, let's get into it. This deck is one that I've had for kind of a while, and for how it's worked out, this deck is the one that I have most taken apart and laid out in front of people. Just, I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's the kind of deck that you can. There's a lot of stuff you can learn from how it's built. I don't know. And I like never lay out any of my other decks. I just never have to. So it's kind of interesting that I've had to do that with this like 6-7 times in the last few months. So I figured, you know what? Let's do a deck tech. Let's lay out all of my ideas, or at least hopefully all of my ideas. I hope I don't forget any, as I'm wont to do. And we can have what my thought process was with a completed deck and one that I just keep tinkering with as time goes on. Because these decks, EDH decks, they're never really finished. So this is an EDH deck, obviously, with the commander of Mayael the Anima. I've heard people pronounce it Mayael. I don't know. I don't know. Is a Naya commander, red, green, white, for a 2/3. Has the ability 3 red, green, white, tap. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature with power 5 or greater from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. I'm so used to it saying in a random order now that I almost replaced that line as I was reading it. So there are a few things that are obvious about what you want to do with this deck, right? You need to have 5 power creatures, and a lot of people look at it as like, oh, you get free creatures. Well, no, not really, because you're spending 6 mana. And while a lot of the creatures that you're going to put into play cost more than 6, they don't cost that much more than 6. The cost for creatures that I end up playing is they average between 6 and 8 mana. So you're not really saving that much mana. What you are getting is a bunch of other stuff instead. You get a free card, because this doesn't come out of your hand, it comes off the top of your library. So that's pretty cool. You get card advantage. You get card selection. If you see multiple creatures, you get a choice of what you put into play. You get instant speed. Notice this doesn't say you can only do it as a sorcery, so you don't have to just jam your creature on your turn. You can see what your opponents are up to and then activate. And you get a few other perks of like synergies. If this said just put a creature from your hand into play, this would be terrible, right? Elvish Piper, which we'll see in a moment, does this for way less mana. The thing you're getting for the extra mana is the card selection, the card advantage, and instant speed. But this deck also has a lot of restrictions, a lot of deck building costs that you have to pay, which also means that it's a deck that doesn't actually have that much in the way of flex slots. A lot of decks you can like, oh, there's a bunch of stuff, like if you want something else here, you can put that there, that's fine. With this deck, there's not a ton. Most of the flex slots are in what giant monsters you play. So let's take a look at the deck, and we'll start there with the monsters. I have these sorted by tag, but the tags aren't in any specific order that I want. So we'll just be sliding around here. So I play 38 giant monsters. Big dumb dummies who are big and dumb is what I call them. It's what this deck is centered around. They all have a reason for being here, and we will get to what those reasons are, but why 38 is kind of important. You don't actually have to play 38. I was messing around with a uh, what is it called? I forgot what it's a hypergeometric calculator, and taking a look at some of the numbers with 38. So remember, we have a 99 card deck. Yes, by the time we're activating our commander, we will have fewer than 99 cards in the deck, but they will be mostly as random as any initial 99. So we can start with there. We have 38 hits, and we're going to look at 5 cards, right? So when you calculate it, remember, we want to hit at least 1 and often 2. So with 38, we're going to get about 92% of the time, we're going to have a hit. And that's great. You don't want this to be really low. Like, technically, if you had 20 big hits in your deck, that's an average of 1 of 5 cards, but you're going to miss a lot of the time. If we take a look at the calculator here, you're going to miss like 30% of the time. And that's a big deal. So instead, we have 38. You can... I messed around with some of these numbers earlier. If you drop to 36, you still have a 90% chance of getting at least 1 in your top 5. You don't really need to get these... By the way, you really don't need to get like 4 or 5 hits. Even 3 hits is not super necessary. You want 1 to 2. If you get a third one, that's cool. 1 in 4 activations to get 3 choices, fine. But below 90%, like, really think about the number, right? If you at 90%, 1 in 10 times I activate my commander, I get nothing. And remember, we're paying 6 mana. 6 mana to activate. If we get nothing, that's really bad. And in some cases, it's game ending. So I think 90% is probably a good place to be. You can go a little bit higher, like I have. If I mess with this deck, there's a reasonable chance I trim some of the monsters. Part of the problem, however, is what the monsters do makes it really hard to want to cut them, because they do something particularly valuable for the deck. So that's why there are 38 in here, which means that's a lot of slots that are just dedicated to giant monsters. There's also mana acceleration, because you don't want to activate your commander on turn 6. I have a personal vendetta with Sol Ring in Commander. I think that card should be banned. I think it is a huge problem. You know, everyone's had those games where your opponent goes turn 1, land, Sol Ring, Signet, and nobody really can do anything about it. And the game's just over before it even really starts. The general defense for this is, well, everybody can play Sol Ring, and yes, they can, but not everybody draws Sol Ring on turn 1. And why do you want that level of variance in your game? Sol Ring is considered in powered cubes, by the way, the most powerful card, usually. Better than Black Lotus most of the time. There are exceptions, but by and large, Sol Ring is considered better than Black Lotus. It is a little while to me that we just let that one run around in the format. Now, I know they made I forget what it's called, the Commander Lotus, but I think that more exacerbates the problem, and I don't know if the same is true for anyone watching this, but in my experience, people tend not to play it unless they're playing really competitively, because it's pretty shitty to just be like, oh, okay, I found my Lotus on turn 1, and like I can run away with the game. It's in Commander probably better to have Lotus than Sol Ring, but still, like, that we have Sol Ring is kind of wild to me. So a lot of my decks, I just refuse to play it. So you'll notice there's no Sol Ring here. As it turns out, Sol Ring's also not that helpful in Mayael, because what we want to do is we want to activate as soon as possible. So let's say we go like turn 1 Sol Ring, turn 2 we still can't play our commander, so maybe we like do something else. Turn 3 we can play the commander and the Sol Ring doesn't do anything, and then turn 4 we can activate. So cool, with 1 card we've activated 2 turns sooner than expected. That's good, but it doesn't do much. Like, it doesn't streamline that much. So it's also justifiable to instead play these accelerants. You can ignore Selvala for the most part because she doesn't work into the curve, but with 2 mana accelerants, as long as the second one is not Sakura Tribuilder, this is the only one where it has to be the first one, you can still activate on turn 4. Here's how it goes. You go turn 1 land, 2/2 land, let's say you play a Tribuilder, get another land. Turn 3, play a Talisman or a Signet, Use that signet to play the commander. You have accelerated twice. Cool, you can activate on turn 4. As long as you're hitting your lands. So that's why it's exclusively 2 mana acceleration. And why it's all come into play untapped, except for the Tribelder. Maybe the Tribelder can be replaced with something. This, I guess, should be... this one's kind of suspect. I think I have a tag for that. Yeah, we'll put it on the chopping block. But we do need... I would only really want to replace it with untapped mana, colored mana that costs 2, which makes it kind of tough. At this point, it might as well be like... It should probably be like Farseek anyway. And I'll explain why in a little bit. There's exactly one card that cares. But, so like, even if it's going to be a come into play tapped 2 mana accelerate, it should probably be Farseek or Rampant Growth instead of the Tribelder. There's a little bit of blocking value, but that doesn't come up that much. Otherwise, all 2 mana come into play untapped and makes colored mana. So now we can activate on turn 4. And we can get some of our monsters into play. But all of our monsters... I think one mistake people make with this deck, if you look at EDH Rec, you'll see this all over the place. I took a look at the EDH Rec page for Mayael just to be like, are there any ideas that I missed? And for the most part, I think people are wildly off with what they're doing. A lot of times people play just these big giant monsters that only are balls of stats. For the most part, I think that's a mistake. Your creatures are going to be better than your opponent's creatures anyway. You don't really need for them to be the biggest creatures. Now, there are some exceptions, like the Eldrazi Titans also have a powerful effect. I don't have them in here because, personally, I think Annihilator is a really annoying ability to play against. I think it just feels bad, so I don't play it because I wouldn't want to play against it. That's another thing I tend to do. If I think it wouldn't be fun for me to play against, I don't have it in here. I just want to double check that this is... Okay. Instead, all of our monsters fall into some category of a thing they do. A kind of effect they have. So we'll start at the top, and I'll explain. So here are a couple of the monsters. Dawnglade Regent and Itali give us some amount of card advantage. In addition, Dawnglade Regent also gives protection, but we'll get to that later. These creatures are on the strong block, but there are some creatures that are disruptive. Hexproof makes it... I don't... Actually, is this supposed to be here? I mean, I guess if this is here, then Archetype of Endurance should be there. But I don't think this should be. I'll remove the Dawnglade Regent here. Should not be in Disruption. Oh, it should be in Protection. I think I accidentally put the... Yeah. I put Disruption instead of Protection. Okay. We do have some amount of Disruption. Angelic Arbiter. Each opponent who casts a spell this turn can't attack with creatures. Each opponent who attacked with creatures this turn can't cast spells. You would be surprised how much this throws people off. You'd think that attacking wouldn't be a big deal if you need to cast spells to deal with my board or whatever. But there are 2 axes with which you can deal with this deck. You can mess with my board, or you can try to attack past me. Both are not necessarily the easiest. The second one being harder, but Angelic Arbiter makes them pick and doesn't let them like choose, and they can't attack their opponents for advantage. There's some creatures like, oh, when this attacks, like look at the top 5 cards and put a creature into play or whatever. Can't do that if you're casting a spell. This is surprisingly disruptive. I've heard people tell me that this is the most annoying creature in my deck. That was a while ago, and I don't think that's true anymore, but surprisingly good. Archon of Valor's Reach, as it turns out, because of our deck constraints, most of our spells are not instants or sorceries. In fact, there are only like 2 or 3 instants and sorceries in the deck, which is also kind of nice because sweepers tend to be sorceries. So you can name sorcery with this, or if you're worried about spot removal or whatever, you can name instant or sorcery pretty reliably, and you'd be surprised at like how much it throws people off. This card is like, it's not the best, but it's pretty good. Boros Battleshaper is one of my favorite cards. There's a category that you might have noticed at the top here. It's the Heart category. Boros Battleshaper is one of those cards. At the beginning of combat, up to one target creature... of each combat, excuse me. At the beginning of each combat, Up to one target creature attacks or blocks this turn if able, and up to one target creature can't attack or block this turn. The value of this card has diminished a lot in the last few years, but I love this card, so I'm just going to keep it in forever. And you know what? It's okay, I think, to have cards that are pretty bad, but you like and you want to play with them. We talked about this when we went over deck building with Hilda of the Icy Crown. The cool thing is, though, you can do a lot of stuff with this. So, for one, you can make your opponents attack into you, but often they're not going to, right? They'll attack for an opponent, but you can get extra value out of that by making a utility creature of an opponent's have to block, right? So, a situation that might happen is like, okay, your opponent has their weak utility creature, it's like a 2/2 or whatever, and they don't really want to get into combat. And they also have like a 6/6. The opponent whose turn it is has a 4/4. You go, okay, when you get to combat, I'll make their 6/6 not able to attack, or not able to block, and I'll make it so their 2/2 has to block. A lot of players are just going to be like, I'll take the free kill of a creature, and you get like kind of removal out of this. It's a lot of fun to play with, and you can do a lot of cool stuff. I have found, though, that its effectiveness and its usefulness is diminishing a lot recently, and I think that's just because cards are kind of built different. As long as we're in the heart category, we have Godsire. This is the worst card in the deck. That is the other tag it has, the worst card in the deck. But I love this card, and I'm going to keep it in here forever. Partly for flavor reasons. Godsire is like, in Shards of Alara, every shard had their like big creature that costs this value. It's one of each of the side colors and 2 of the center colors. So for Naya, 2 green, 1 red, and 1 white. This is the one for Naya. It's an 8/8 Vigilance that taps to put an 8/8 Beast creature token into play. And that's red, green, and white. The token, you can see here, it's kind of whatever. But there's a funny story. The token's actually rarer than Godsire. At the time, they printed tokens at the rarity of the card that makes them. And the only card that makes this beast token is Godsire, which is a mythic rare. The thing is, not every pack has a token, like every pack has a rare. So your odds of getting a mythic token were much lower than getting any given mythic rare. So, in part because I have this token, I'm never cutting Godsire, even though it's not that good. But that's okay. You can have cards that aren't that good. All right, so we did the card advantage. Okay, we're skipping Chalking Block. Or Disruption. We just finished Disruption. We have some finishers. Thunderfoot Baloth might not feel like a finisher, but giving Trample to the board is a pretty big deal, and I didn't really know where else to put this kind of effect of just my board gets enough bigger where it becomes a real issue to block. I guess we could put it in the like Trample column, which there is one, and I think it's there too, but it's probably also okay to call it a finisher. Endray's Forerunner is closer to what you would think of as a finisher. Maybe this should be Craterhoof Behemoth. That's a card I should add to considering, actually. Craterhoof Behemoth, the problem I had with it was, my thought was, well, I'm not going to have that many creatures. And normally when I would play with my friends, I would have like 2 or 3 creatures. And like, well, Endray's Forerunners does it a little bit better. It's a slightly better body. It has better abilities on its own. So like, isn't that better? However, I have found generally, this is good tea, by the way. With the lemon helps. Maybe this should be Craterhoof Behemoth. It's kind of close. You can swap that out if you want. You can have both if you want. I just have this one, so whatever. And then Gisela. Gisela is also a bit of disruption, but in a kind of unusual way. I guess in the same way that Boros Battleshaper is. So Gisela, flying for first strike. If a source would... I forgot to read some of the other ones, but I'll pick it up again. Gisela, if a source would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage instead. You don't have to deal that damage. As long as damage is being dealt to an opponent or an opponent's thing, it takes twice as much. And if a source would deal damage to you or permanent you control, prevent half of that damage. Rounded up. And because it prevents rounded up, it gets kind of funny when people copy Gisela, which happens sometimes. You don't just take normal damage again. You take normal damage from even valued sources, and you take one less damage from odd value sources. It's very funny. So like Thunderfoot Veloth, it's a 5/5. You cut it in half, you take 2, double it, you're taking 4. You just saved a damage, even though it should be like the same again. And I won't get into the mechanics of why it works that way. But okay, we have some disruption. We also have a little bit of haste. Haste is an effect that I think is actually kind of overrated in this deck, and that's why Lightning Greaves, I believe, is on the chopping block. Oh, it's not. The thing is, the problem with haste is that most of the time it's better not to activate your commander on your turn. Also, the general play pattern of the deck is that you're going to either cast a spell or activate your commander, and probably not do both or cast multiple spells in a turn. Your spells are just too big. You're not realistically going to have 12 mana to play 2 6-mana creatures, which, by the way, would be like the smallest creatures in your deck. So, like, having big haste enablers is not that big a deal. Playing a commander and activating the same turn is similarly not that big a deal because you want to play Mayael on turn 3, activate on turn 4, 5, 6, something like that. If she dies, so it's not like you're going to be able to play her in the first case and activate right away. That's way too much mana. And later in the game, if you're going to do that, well, that means she has to have left the battlefield, which means you're probably paying at least 2 extra, which is now 5 to play, 6 to activate. That's 11 mana. Again, the issue of like you're probably not casting multiple spells in a turn. 11 mana is kind of a lot. And if you notice, we don't have massive amounts of mana. We're trying to cast. This is kind of a mid-range deck. We don't make ungodly amounts of mana. We make enough to get our stuff into play. So haste is actually like not that relevant. Now, let's say there are other ways of putting creatures onto the battlefield that sometimes you will do on your turn. So having a little bit of it is very useful. Xenagos also these also happen to do other things. Lightning Greaves is protection, though again it's on the chopping block at the moment. Rhythm of the Wild. By the way, I cut Fires of Maya from this deck recently because haste just isn't that valuable. Rhythm of the Wild can instead give 1/1 counters, and the power does matter, and like gives you a little bit of protection from counter magic, only for your creatures, but most of your deck is creatures anyway. This card is kind of questionable. It's not the best. Maybe this can be on the chopping block as well. But at least it does something else. Sorkin Goreclaw. Another card that does more than give haste, but it does give haste, which is nice. Is Trample, gives your other creatures Trample, which is a big deal. And whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it gains haste until end of turn. It basically gets both halves of Riot, which is pretty nice. Like, the 1/1 counter always matters, and sometimes the haste matters. Okay, fine. And then Xenagos just makes your creature absolutely enormous, and especially with trampling creatures, that can be a lot of damage. Not to mention, it is an indestructible creature that is a creature most of the time in our deck. We have a lot of pips for devotion. So it's indestructible 6/5 as long as your devotion to red and green is less than 7. As Xenagos isn't a creature, but a huge amount of the time he is. At the beginning of your combat of your turn, another target creature, so it can't target himself. That's important to note. It's exactly 1 creature, but exactly 1 creature is probably how many we have coming into play on our turn. We probably aren't going to need haste for our whole board, so this works out. And then it gets +X haste and +X until end of turn, where X is its power. Our creatures have massive powers, so even for something like Surok, like, you know, this is a 12 power trampler coming in. In the context of this deck, as I say it, I'm feeling like, oh, that's not very big. That's kind of small. But for most people, that's a big creature. 12 power trampling is a big deal. I'm going to skip some of these sections and come back because there's another category that's related here, but I can't group tags, which is Trample. We want some amount of Trample. We saw 2 of these cards already. I guess I didn't read Thunderfoot Baloth. But it's a 5/5 with Trample, and it says as long as you control your commander, Thunderfoot Baloth and other creatures you control get +2/+2 and have Trample. We already saw Surok, just gives the board Trample, and Stonehoof Chieftain. 8/8, Trample, Indestructible. When another creature you control attacks, it gains Trample and Indestructible in a turn. So it's also protecting our creatures. while getting them through and being a pretty big body. And 8/8 is pretty sizable in this deck. Most of our creatures are like 5/6 power. 8/8 is relevantly large. All right. We also have life gain. I think it's important to have some amount of life gain index, but you don't want to just jam a card just for life gain. It should probably synergize, and it should probably be like enough life gain to solve the problem you're having. So for some decks, you just need to gain like 6, 7, 8 life in a game just for the buffer. Okay, fine. In this deck, the way we gain life happens to be so much that it puts us out of reach. But the goal wasn't to gain 100 life. It was just, let's put in cards that gain life in a synergistic way. And as it turns out, it works out in that fashion. So the two primary examples, the ones I always think of for this deck, are the first two. Verdant Sun's Avatar. 5/5, whenever Verdant Sun's Avatar or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. We already have massive creatures. It starts by gaining 5 life, but often gains if it's not dealt with, gains in the magnitude of like 40, 50 life in a game. Windburst Crafter is very similar. It's 5/7 flying. Attacking creatures you control have lifelink. Again, our creatures are massive. If we connect once with 2 or 3 creatures and this is in play, we probably have enough life where we don't have to worry about incidental damage. People have to put a concerted effort into killing us, and that's kind of what I wanted out of life gain effects. This is the gold standard of life gain in my decks. If I can get an effect like this where this already works, it already synergizes, the way it gains life is synergistic, and it doesn't ask a lot of me. It doesn't ask anything of me, actually, about in deck construction or in play patterns. That's perfect. That's great. There are a couple other cards that happen to gain life, so I put them here. Wormcoil Engine is not here because it gains life. There are a couple reasons it's here. One, protection is actually kind of an issue that comes up. Commander's Plate, I think, is the card that gives protection from from everything but the commander's colors, from every color but the equipped creature's colors or something like that. That has been an issue, and commander damage does cut through any amount of life we have. So Wormcoil Engine is a little bit of a hedge against that. It also, having Death Touch means we can tangle with massive creatures. Sometimes people will put into play like a 30/30 just because it synergizes with their deck or whatever. Every so often people will have a Lord of Extinction, and so like, okay, here's a Wormcoil Engine that solves that. And it's like decently resilient, and it went into the deck when this card was much better than it is now. It's not the greatest. Yeah, it's definitely cuttable. I can put this on the chopping block, actually. But that's not the one I wanted. But it's fine. And it does happen to gain life. The tokens aren't super relevant, but because in this deck, like a 3/3 is so tiny, it doesn't matter very much. But for other people, a 3/3 can kind of matter, and so sometimes it comes up that the tokens are useful. Zakama is not here for the life game, but he does do that. I guess I should read Wormcoil Engine because I forgot to. Death Touch lifelink. When it dies, make a 3/3 worm with Death Touch and a 3/3 worm with lifelink. Zakama, Vigilance, Reach, Trample, 9/9. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, untap your lands. So if we get it off of Mayael, we don't get to untap our lands. But that's okay, because the rest of this card is so out of this world good. It doesn't matter if we don't cast it, and if we ever do cast it, which sometimes we draw our creatures and have to cast them, it gets that much better. 2 in a red, deals 3 damage to target creature. Useful to have removals. Sometimes you'll have to pay into it twice to kill a thing, but like a lot of time you can just pay 3. 2 in a green, destroy target artifact or enchantment. That's insane. Probably the best mode on the card. And then 2 in a white, gain 3 life. Not super relevant, but okay. It's there. Every so often I'll gain life with it. Something I forgot to mention at the outset, and I wish I had, is my history with this deck. This is actually the second build I've had with this deck. The first time I built it was, must have been like 2010, 2011, something like that. Pretty new to Commander. What existed was very, very different. It wasn't even called Commander yet. It was called EDH. And it was just a cool thing to build, and all right, sure. Then I quit Magic for a few years and came back. When I came back, I was playing with a lot of casual players who like Commander, because obviously, and like a lot of my decks, I was like, I kind of wanted to prove a point. And it was a deck I'd built before, so I was like, all right, let's rebuild it. The point I wanted to prove was playing Wrath of Gods and just sweepers in general is really good. And this deck really shows you. If you don't play sweepers, this deck will eat you alive. It's like spot removal is okay, but it's not going to do it. Not unless everyone at the table is pointing spot removal at my stuff. You really need a few sweepers. That said, the deck is pretty bad against sweepers. It has some protections for it, but it's an intentional weakness, and I think that's okay too. When I rebuilt this deck, that was like 9 years ago now. So I've had this for a long time, and I've been putting a lot of thought into it, and that's why I wanted to go over my decisions and discuss everything. I'm gonna come back over the bulk of monsters because I think there are some that don't have other tags. Artisan of Kozilek, for example. Oh no, it does. But so we'll come back, but we'll see what else is in here. We have protection effects. Archetype of endurance. Creatures you control have hexproof. That's the important line. The other line, I guess, is cool, but creatures your opponents control can't or lose hexproof and can't have or gain hexproof. Avacyn, Angel of Hope. Flying Vigilance, indestructible 8/8. Other permanents you control have indestructible. I was confused at first because I have a different printing of this. And the original printing just says all of your stuff has indestructible instead of other stuff, but also she has printed indestructible, so it didn't matter. Dongley Regent we already talked about. There's also Spearbreaker Behemoth. This card I'm pretty sure I already put on the chopping block. Oh no, I didn't. This card is it's a little dorky. 5/5 indestructible is pretty vanilla among my creatures, and as I mentioned before, I think vanilla creatures are a mistake in this kind of deck. You can also pay 1 to make target creature with power 5 or greater gain indestructible until end of turn. That's like okay. It doesn't actually end up being that useful a lot of the time. You have to spend most of your mana a lot, and if people are coming for your board, like you need like 3, 4, 5 mana to like really protect stuff. It's kind of dorky, but I just wanted more stuff to protect me from wraths. I used to play Stalking Vengeance in this slot instead. Stalking Vengeance is a 5/5 with haste that says whenever another creature you control dies, it deals damage equal to its power to target player or planeswalker. This was, if someone wraths me, I can flip this off of Mayael and they'll die. It just like people will die. I kind of didn't like that because part of the point of the deck was to teach people to play wraths. So if I'm punishing them for doing it, that seemed kind of silly. But also, it's kind of dorky with otherwise. It doesn't do anything unless things are dying. So I didn't like it so much. In a similar way, Spearbreaker Behemoth is kind of underwhelming, but like I have a foil one from Shards, so I was just like, well, I kind of want it then, you know. All right, we also have a little bit of recursion. We haven't seen the non-monster cards in the deck yet, so you haven't seen this Eternal Witness, but Eternal Witness is here. It's a little dorky. It doesn't really do very much. It's just like it's a reasonable staple, so we have it. Artisan of Kozilek, 9 mana, 10/9, and the 9 mana actually matters in this case because we might want to cast it. When you cast this spell, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That effect is strong enough that I put up with the other stuff on this card, which is that it doesn't do very much while it's in play. It's mostly just stats. It has Annihilator 2, which I don't love, but like it's small enough where that's not a huge deal. But it's a 10/9 with Annihilator 2, which is mostly just a ball of stats. Not that great. This card is pretty questionable, if I'm being honest. But it does do something kind of nice. Greenwater Marasa is a lot better. 5/4. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. When it dies, you may exile it. If you do, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. That's great. It's everything I want. It's 5 power, so we can hit recursion off of Mayael, which is really nice. It regrowths 2 things, and you don't really care if it dies. Yeah, it's great. We also have a lot of removal. This is, I think, the biggest misstep that I see people make with Mayael, is that they just go, well, I should just have the biggest, baddest monsters and ignore what my opponents are doing. In fact, this is a bigger problem in Commander in general, people just don't interact with their opponents, and it kind of sucks. They just play battle cruiser Magic, and this deck also is a good example of like you can play slobber knocker Magic, but still be messing with your opponents, interact with them, and make improve your odds of winning, make it harder for them to win by messing with their board. We have a lot of ways of doing this. Angel of Ruins. Flying, when it enters the battlefield, exile up to 2 target artifacts or enchantments. That's great. Getting 2 artifacts or enchantments, which is probably the hardest, like the most important card type to deal with that we would struggle with. Creatures are actually a lot easier. It also has plane cycling too. Oh, it's a 5/7, not a 5/5. It also has plane cycling for 2, so if we ever draw it and we're not going to cast it, we can use it to fix our mana a little bit. We don't really want to plane cycle it, but it is a bonus that it does that. Apex Altasaur, 10/10. When it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Enrage, whenever it is dealt damage, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. This can chain fight a bunch of stuff, basically up to 9 power worth of things without dying. You can even turn it in to trade for more power than that. And this kind of card is what I realized was the solution to the removal problem. It was like, how do I interact with my opponent in a way that I can like get those important stuff off the table, but also not have to play Swords to Plowshares or whatever. And the solution is creatures that fight. My creatures are bigger than yours. I'll just fight stuff. That's fine. This was also a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist anymore because the deck used to be a different version of the deck required this solution. I used to play a card called Primal. Was it Primal Force? No, Primal. I thought it was Primal Vigor. No. Primal Surge? Primal Surge. This used to be the only instant or sorcery in my deck. 8 green, sorcery, exile the top card of your library. If it's a permanent card, you may put it onto the battlefield. If you do, repeat this process. It just puts your deck on the battlefield. And our deck is better than most people's decks. It's usually lethal immediately, and that's kind of why I cut it. I didn't like how much it was just play this card, win the game. I feel like that's very unhealthy in gameplay. It's just like, do you have a counter spell? Nope, you lose. That kind of sucks. So I ended up cutting it, but the fight creatures were a solution to a problem that I was having at the time. I could probably put in like Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile again, because I don't need to steer clear of instants and sorceries as much anymore. But I have a pretty good solution in the creatures that kill stuff. Dragonlord Atarka, 8/8 flying trample. This is one of the bigger beaters in the deck. It's kind of funny because like you see so many monsters, you're just like, I don't know about you, 8/8 to a lot of people is like, oh my god, that's so big. For me, I'm like, it's only a little bigger than my average creature, but that is big. When it enters the battlefield, deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers your opponents control. It's not the best removal. It's actually a little weak, but you get to kill some stuff, sometimes 2 things. It's fine. You're giving up a little bit of removal power that some of the other cards have in exchange for flying and higher power than a lot of these cards. Like Apex Altasaur sure is bigger, doesn't fly or have trample. And stuff like Thorn Mammoth and Rage Beast are just smaller and don't fly, you know. Speaking of, Gruul Rage Beast was one of the original solutions to this problem, the removal problem, which is a 6/6. And when Gruul Rage Beast or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature fights target creature an opponent controls. This is mandatory. Something to note. This is mandatory. It is. This is a little bit risky sometimes. It means if I'm casting like Eternal Witness, it's gonna die if my opponent has a creature. If I cast Selvala, I have to have something that she can crash into without dying. Same thing with casting my commander. It's a little risky. The trade-off though is that every creature is a removal spell from now on, and that's pretty strong. It's one of the, I guess it's not one of the worst fight creatures, but like, it is fallen from how good I used to think it is. Partly for that reason, partly because more cards got printed. Inferno Titan. This is one of the weaker cards in the deck. It's already on the chopping block, that I know for sure. But this is also like this was also put in when I was like, well, it's moderately castable. Doesn't really matter if it's moderately castable. Most of our stuff is 6 anyway. But it's fine. The fire breathing isn't super important. It's red. It gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And what you're really playing it for is that when it enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. Cool thing about that is you do get a little bit of consistent removal and interaction, and I have had games where one player was kind of unassailable, and the 3 damage from Inferno Titan attacking other players going to their face was able to get them dead, even though I couldn't really attack them effectively anymore. I don't remember exactly why, but I just remember like attacking them was not much of an option. So it's okay. This is a fine creature. What is better than a fine creature is Kogla and Yadaro. 7/7, 2 red, red, green, green. I guess that doesn't really matter that much. 7/7. When it enters the battlefield, choose one. It gains trample and haste until end of turn. Almost never relevant. But it can be, and I like that it's an option in the event that the other mode isn't as important, or like I just need to cast a 7-power haster. This is where the kind of haste I'd like to have more often. If I don't need the effect I'm playing this for, I can gain haste instead. And the effect I'm playing it for is the other option, which is it fights target creature you don't control. Great, removal. That seems a little dorky in isolation, but it also has a really, really important effect other than that, which is 2 red, green, discard Kogla and Yadaro, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment, shuffle Kogla and Yadaro into your library from your graveyard, then draw a card. It's a little inefficient as a naturalize, but it puts our monster back in the deck, which is where we want it. Remember, Mayael grabs it out of the deck. Creatures in your hand end up sitting there for a long time. They have to do something pretty important for the situation for you to cast it instead of activating your commander. So it's artifact enchantment removal, which is important, that shuffles itself back into the deck, and when it comes into play, it's creature removal. This card is nuts. I don't think I've even gotten to do any of the. I don't think I've even played with this card very much yet. I put it in the deck and I haven't drawn it or flipped it off of Mayael very much. But even still, like I'm certain like that is very good. Also, another note about the play pattern of the deck is yes, you go like try to activate Mayael on turn 4, and then just for the foreseeable future, you're activating your commander unless someone gets rid of her. However, in the meantime, you're also trying to accelerate your mana. You're still playing lands, you're still playing your accelerants, just not at the cost of activating your commander. So like turn 5, you played land number 5, you have 7 mana. Oh, now you can play another Signet and activate. And then you'll work your way up to casting multiple spells in a turn eventually, or activating your commander plus cast a spell. Well, on the way, you'll at some point have like 10 mana. You can activate Mayael and cast Kogla and Yadaro. Or not cast, you can discard Kogla and Yadaro. It's basically channel. It's a mix of channel and cycle, but it's closer to cycle than channeling, but they don't call it that. All right. Another great card, Kogla to Titanate. 7/6. When it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control, and when it attacks, it destroys target artifact or enchantment defending player controls, which is great. It has 1 more line of text, 1 to green, return target human you control to its owner's hand, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. I don't think there are any humans in this deck. That line of text is not relevant. People are like, oh, you should play some humans. I guess there's like Eternal Witness. It never comes up. Don't worry about it. It's not there for that effect. If I ever activate it, cool, but I'm not going to. I really don't think there are any humans. Scourge of Carriages. This card is a little clunky, especially if you have to cast it, which sometimes you do. But it does something really important, which is it deals with swarms of things. 6/6 flying, 1 in a red, deal 2 damage to each creature without flying. Great. Our commander lives through that. Zavala lives through that. Eternal Witness doesn't, but who cares? Tribe Elder doesn't, but you can sack it. It doesn't matter. And if your commander's already dead, you can start activating more than once. It's not going to kill your big monsters until you activate 3 times. And sometimes your opponent just has like, 10 2/2s or whatever. And I'm like, well, my fights are not going to be a good way of getting rid of that. The sweeper is. And that's kind of why it's here. You can also occasionally activate the 5 in a red, deal 6 damage to each other creature with flying. I have done that. It's pretty rare. Normally, the only time I really consider it is when I have something like Avacyn or Stonehoof Chieftain in play, where I can indestructible my flyers first. Same thing with activating the 2 damage ability 3 or 4 times. I'll do that if I have Avacyn, where it doesn't matter. Or Gisela. Gisela is another really good one with the Scourge. It's mana intensive, but it solves a problem, so it's here. Terastodon. This is probably the card a lot of people think of to put in the deck. It's kind of probably the most stapley creature for Mayael. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put into a graveyard this way, its controller makes a 3/3 elephant. You don't really blow up your stuff very much, which sometimes happens with when people play Terastodon. Yeah, usually this is just removal, and you don't really care about 3/3s. Maybe it will gang up on one of your monsters, but your monsters are like somewhat disposable sometimes. It's the 3/3s aren't a big deal. Thorn Mammoth is cool. 6/6 trample. When it or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Thorn Mammoth fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So it comes with the fight, and then every other creature lets this thing fight. It's kind of like a Rule Rage Beast, except I'm always fighting with a 6/6 and not just with whatever comes into play. Tyrant's Familiar. It's kind of a holdover from like a long time ago, and I haven't really reconsidered. It's probably still good, but 5/5 Flying Haste. As long as you control your commander, it gets +2/+2 and has, whenever it attacks, it deals 7 damage to target creature defending player controls. Small removal. Woodfall Primus, another staple for this deck. 6/6 trample. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-creature permanent, and it has persist. By the way, this is a little bit of a synergy with Rhythm of the Wild, because it still has Riot. It's not when you cast the creature. It's just when a non-token enters the battlefield, and you can put a 1/1 counter on it. This doesn't happen very much. It has happened before. It's cool when it does. And we've already talked about Sakama. So we have a lot of removal. Notice 13 of our creatures have some form of removal. And a few of them have multiple forms of removal. It's just really important to be able to interact with your opponent. Okay. So I think those are all the monsters. I'm going to go through the list just to make sure. Oh, there are a few I didn't talk about. Ancient Gold Dragon. I'm trying this one out. 7/10 flying. That part is actually pretty relevant for the card. You wouldn't think it is in a deck where everything's big. Hey, Peachykeen, how many non-basic forests does the deck have? We'll get to that. I have a decent number. I have the Shocks, the Duels, and the Trilands, and a couple others. But we'll get there. Ancient Gold Dragon. The 7/10 ends up being pretty important, weirdly enough. But it also lets me swarm a little bit. Whenever Ancient Gold Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a number of 1/1 blue fairy dragon creature tokens with flying equal to the result. I don't think I have ever untapped with any of these tokens. It just doesn't work out that way. I rolled a 20 before, and then an opponent played a Wrath of God, and you're like, yeah, you probably should do that. That makes sense. Yeah, like, I have not confused in the slightest about this event. Or someone had like a Magus of the Tabernacle. That was a weird game, and I was just not going to pay for my tokens. I'll try it some more. Maybe it's good. Oh, there's another card. I should take a look at the other ancient dragons. Okay, Ancient Bronze Dragon puts X 1/1 counters. I don't care about that. And the Copper Dragon makes a number of treasure tokens. Ooh, Ancient Copper Dragon might be good. I'm going to put that on the considering list. A friend of mine was talking to me about it, and I just was like, yeah, I have no idea why I didn't have that. Why I didn't even consider it. So we'll put that in considering. Well, he had actual Tabernacle. Oh, he had actual Tabernacle? Oh, okay. I've forgotten. Okay, yeah. All right. It was a wild game. He had actual Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. I was just like, when I was thinking back on that story, I'm like, there's no way someone had an actual Tabernacle. It was probably, oh, I didn't put this in my removal tag. Huh. See? This is why we're going over all of it. We also have Angel of Serenity here. 5/6 flying. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile up to 3 other target creatures from the battlefield and/or creature cards from graveyards. And when it leaves the battlefield, return those cards to owner's hands. So this is kind of like an Oblivion Ring for 3 creatures, like 3 Banishing Lights. But you can, if you don't need to exile those, you can also exile creatures from your graveyard to get back to your hand when this leaves the battlefield. That doesn't happen super often, but like, all right, it's a little bit of recursion. I guess we can technically put it in the recursion tag. This is mostly removal. I think we talked about all of these. I'm just making sure I haven't missed any of these creatures. Ilharg, the Raise Boar. This is a monster that also helps cheat out other monsters. 5 red red, so very, very castable. 6/6 trample. When it attacks, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking, and then return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. Putting it back in your hand is actually kind of nice. It saves it from removal, and you can just keep putting it in with Ilhard. There are also some creatures, like if it has a come into play effect, you get that effect again, like an Inferno Titan or like a Green Warden Marasa, whatever. And when it dies or is put in exile from the battlefield, it goes back into the library third from the top, where you can activate Mayael and get it right back again. I could have sworn I put this in the disruption. I did. Why did we not talk about Rurik Thar? Yeah, Rurik Thar is here. Vigilance, reach 6/6. It attacks each combat if able. That is sometimes actually kind of a problem, because 6/6 is among the more killable creatures in my deck. But whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, it deals 6 damage to that player. We don't have a lot of those, and we can take 6 once or twice, especially if we have Windbris Raptor or Verdant Sun's Avatar going. But more importantly, combo decks cannot beat this card. If this card is on the battlefield, they can't win. And some control decks struggle with it. Just a lot of decks, like, in conjunction with the amount of pressure we put on our opponents. This card is very, very good against people trying to dirtle or like who struggle to deal with our creatures, especially outside of combat. And then one I knew we hadn't gotten to was World Spineworm. This is the one like big meatball I'm okay with playing, other than like Artisan of Kozilek, because it just synergizes so well. So it's 8 triple green, not castable. I have cast it. This is not castable. 15/15 trample. This guy is enormous. Even for my deck, it is gigantic. You say no better creature exists in the game. Well, I mean, there's a 16/16 that exists, but that card is bad. And like Emrakul the Aeon's Torrent is better than this. But well, 1, that card is banned, and 2, I wouldn't play it anyway. But when World Spineworm dies, you make 3 5/5 green worm creature tokens with trample. You get the same amount of power back. And while 5/5s are much smaller than 15, they're still really hard to deal with when there are 3 of them. That's still a lot of power. It's the same amount, right? And when it's put into a graveyard from anywhere, you shuffle it back into the deck where Mayael can find it again. Cool. So now that we've gone over like the tags and stuff, I'm gonna go over the cards in like normal order, because there's a lot of stuff I haven't talked about. So with the creatures, I think I just want to double check that we haven't missed any, because there are some other random creatures. Okay, Seedborn Muse. This is a must play in Mayael. It's so ridiculous. Always play this instead of activating, because then you'll untap and activate on everybody's turn. Super, super good. You activate your commander every turn. If this doesn't get dealt with very quickly, you run away with the game. I could have sworn I missed another card. Where'd it go? Elvish Piper. Putting creatures into play is a big deal, actually. I should just go to that tag now. So that's the other concession to deck space, is you need to cheat creatures into play. Or you don't need to, but it's just very, very good to have basically as many of this effect as you can realistically play, as long as it's like moderately efficient. So we have Elvish Piper, 3 and a green, 1/1. Its mana cost does matter. We have to cast this one. We don't get to cheat it into play. Green tap, put a creature from your hand onto the battlefield. Yeah, it seems good. No question. This is how you can get the things in your hand onto the battlefield without having to cast them. You can also, because it's only 1 to activate, you can do this plus activate Mayael very easily. Similar with Monster Manual, it's 3 and a green for an artifact, 1 and a green tap. You may put a creature from your hand onto the battlefield. It's basically an Elvish Piper. Costs 1 more to activate, but it's not a creature, so it's not susceptible to removal. And like the 1 mana is not that big a deal. We just want more of this effect. It also has an adventure. Zoological Study, 2 and a green, sorcery, mill 5 cards, then return a creature card milled this way to your hand. I've never done this, and I don't anticipate I ever will. That's not why it's here. If you do it, cool, but like I can only really imagine doing this if you're very late in the game, nobody has any resources, and you're in top deck mode. This is I guess like we'll get a creature, then cast this, then put the creature into play or whatever. For the most part, you don't do that. And then Quicksilver Amulet, probably the worst of this effect because it's so expensive, but it's more of the effect. And remember, we can't rely on our commander being in play. So 4 mana artifact, 4 tap, choose a creature from your hand, and put that creature into play. Sure, it's exactly the same thing. And this gets to what the game plans are. We already talked about game plan A, which is player commander, activate as soon as possible, Activate every turn for the rest of the game. However, we can't rely on that. You know, this is something I know software engineers talk about. Is optimistic thinking is kind of a problem. Ask yourself, what if something goes wrong? All right, if our commander dies, plan B, use our creature cheat engines to put monsters into play. Okay, what if those get interacted with and we don't get to do that? Plan C is just cast the monsters. Just play big hitters out of hand until our opponent can't handle them. If our opponent deals with all three of those things, we will lose. That's just going to happen. But it does require our opponent to do several kind of different things. And consistently. They have to interact with us. They can't just do their own thing. We will interact with them and we will attack them. This doesn't beat everything, obviously. Like, some people can go bigger than this, especially combo decks. But that's the basic game plan. People can't just, like, have their zombie tribal deck and expect it to work. We also have a couple other ways of cheating creatures in play in the form of a sorcery and 2 enchantments. We have Defense of the Heart. At the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent has 3 or more creatures, it's any opponent, but it can't be 3 creatures among your opponents. One player has to have at least 3 creatures, which isn't that many. You sacrifice Defense of the Heart. If you do, go search your library for 2 creatures, put them into play. Very frequently, this gets Avacyn plus Archetype of Endurance. That's just really hard to interact with, but sometimes I get other stuff. Sometimes there's a lot of situational creatures that we can get, as we saw, like maybe we need some removal or whatever else. There's also Lurking Predators, 4 green enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, you may put that card on the bottom. Oh, I forgot about this. This is like one way where Soccer Tribe Elder is better as a creature than Farseek. If we flip that, like, all right, we get a thing at least. The only choice you have with this card, as a note, is whether to put the card on the bottom. Everything else is mandatory. You must reveal. You must put the creature into play. This is also why some like really situational creatures, stuff that like that would be like that could be bad if it comes at the wrong time, don't really have a place in this deck because sometimes you don't get to pick what you get. And Selvala Stampede, this is both Selvala Stampede and Lurking Predators are cards I will play instead of activating Mayael, even if I have the option to, because they often do a lot more. Lurking Predators, by the way, is one of those cards that is so scary that people often remove it before it does anything scary. That said, if I flip 2 monsters off of this, it's probably done enough. Selvala Stampede. Council's Dilemma. Starting with 4 green sorcery. Council's Dilemma. Starting with you. Each player votes for wild or free. For each free vote, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card, and for each and put it onto the battlefield. And for each free vote, you put a permanent from your hand onto the battlefield. I read that not the way it's worded, but that's the idea. Of usually it's better if you're playing against this card to choose free because they don't get card advantage. They get selection, but like how much big stuff could they have where it's a problem where they put it into play? It's much, even though they're getting stuff at random off the top, it is for free off the top. It depends a little bit. If someone's playing this in like their elf tribal deck, they shouldn't, but if they do, okay, you can give them the free cards because like what is like 3 Llanowar Elves gonna do as opposed to like maybe they'll put in like Regal Force and draw 8 cards or something. But against this deck, most of my creatures are monsters. I will always vote wild, and my opponents should probably vote free. That said, if I'm casting this, I probably have 3 creatures to put into play for my hand, so it does put like 20 to 25 mana worth of stuff on the battlefield. This, however, is the card that makes Tribe Elder worse, because flipping into Tribe Elder feels really bad. And that's probably more relevant than Lurking Predators getting a random hit, so I still think that Tribe Elder should probably come out. Let me double check that we don't have any other categories, and then we can go into the like card by card to make sure that I haven't missed any cards in general. I think we've gotten everything in the categories. No, we have utility. So we already talked about Seaborn Muse, Rhythm of the Wild, and Eternal Witness. What I haven't talked about are these other 2. Worldly Tutor is pretty obvious. It searches for a creature. One thing that's extra cool is that if you can do it in a turn where you can activate your commander, you can search for a creature that you need right now, you need on the battlefield. This is sometimes like Avacyn to protect you from a Wrath effect, or you desperately need to get rid of an artifact or enchantment, so you get like Angel of Ruins, or there's a lot of situations that can come up where it's like, I just need this right now. And so you can go get that. And then Scroll Rack is very, very similar. Is 2-mana artifact, 1 tap. Oh, I guess I didn't read Worldly Tutor. It's search your library for a creature, put on top, shuffle your library, put the creature on top. Obviously, you have to reveal it. Scroll Rack, 2-mana artifact, 1 tap, choose any number of cards in your hand, and set those cards aside. Put an equal number of cards from your library into your hand, then put the cards you set aside on top in any order. This is not a draw, so like you can in some decks save yourself from decking out with this. That's not relevant here. What is relevant is that the monsters in our hand just clog up the hand most of the time. They're not usually castable, and remember, we only have a few cards that let us put them into play from our hand, so it's not free. So it's not like very often that we get to make use of them. So one, we can shuffle them away by putting them on top and then activating Mayael, and then the rest of them go away. The rest of them go to get shuffled into the deck. But we also, if we need one of the creatures in our hand to be hit off of Mayael, so again, if we need the protection or if we need removal or whatever else, we could put it on top of the Scroll Rack, activate Mayael, and in the process, get rid of the cards we don't need. So Scroll Rack is the kind of card that I think often gets suggested in decks as just a staple. Same thing with Sensei's Divining Top. Like, everyone can play it, but it's not good in every deck. I think in this deck, it is exceptional. It does something relevantly different than other cards can, and I think it deserves a place. But you notice there's no Sensei's Divining Top because it doesn't do what Scroll Rack does. And of course, the worst card in the deck is this Godsire. So as far as cards that we haven't talked about, let's double check, make sure we haven't missed anything. I believe we talked about all of these creatures, including the random ones that aren't monsters. Notice instants and sorceries. We have a total of 4. 2 of the sorceries are ramp. So especially after we've cast Selvala Stampede, or after we've cast Worldly Tutor, Archon of Valor's Reach can very easily name instant or sorcery and not have a problem. And sometimes it's worth turning off sorceries even if you haven't cast Selvala Stampede. Like, what if you don't draw it this game? You don't have a way of searching for it or anything. We have our artifacts. Most of it is acceleration. Some of it's protection. Some of it's creature cheat. Some of it's synergy, whatever. And then we have our lands. So I haven't talked about the lands at all. My mana base has a few important thoughts. The first is that with the play group I used to play with, I don't play with them so much anymore. If you have 3 lands come into play tapped in a game, that's going to be a huge problem. So I tried to minimize the number of lands that come in tapped. Some of these can be cut because they do. I just haven't yet. So Cabaretti Courtyard, Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse. I probably don't need this fixing. These could probably even be basic lands, isn't it? It would be fine. But I actually would prefer to replace these with the Midnight Hunt lands. I wonder if I can find them. All right, from the expansion, Midnight Hunt. Really? All right, it's Innistrad Midnight Hunt, and the type is land. Looking at the number of forests and fetch lands I search for forests, you suggest Patron of the Orochi for the deck. I'll take a look into it in just 1 second. But that might, I think I might have considered it before, and I think things have changed since. Oh my word. All right. Expansion. Innistrad, Midnight Hunt. Type, land. And then we want rarity. Rare. Now if Gatherer would cooperate, maybe I could have done this in Scryfall. That's fine. It's fine. I should probably be playing these lands instead. I said rare, but okay. Like deserted. So I should probably have like overgrown farmland. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you can choose 2 or more other lands. There are a bunch of lands I could cut from here, but These should probably be in there. These I probably don't need the Evolving Wild type stuff anymore. Fabled Passage is still fine because it comes into play untapped most of the time, and the turns where it doesn't are turns where you probably don't need it to. So like, you can play one tap land in this deck on turn 1, and that's okay. Or on like, or the turn after you get 6 mana, you can play tap lands and it's okay. Same thing with Prismatic Vista, it comes in untapped. But then the rest, you notice, are untapped. There's a fetch land. Cool. Bountiful Promenade comes into play untapped unless you control two. Comes into play tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. Canopy Vista and Cinderglade are the ones where I'm like, maybe these should be the Midnight Hunt lands. But if I cut these fetch lands for basics, these get a lot better. These enter tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. They also have land types, so these are fetchable, though they've made enough fetchable land types where that's less important. Command Tower untapped. A bunch of basic lands. I think basic lands are underrated. We have 13 here. Command Tower. Jetmir's Garden comes in tapped, but it's fetchable. Jungle Shrine. Oh, something else to note is that almost all of my lands make green. Notice I don't have Sacred Foundry, and that's intentional. My deck is way more green than other colors. My perfect mana to cast any spell in my deck is triple green, triple white, and that's only for Avacyn. Otherwise, it's double white, and double red. Oh, I guess Angel of Serenity is also triple white. So because green is the most important, then white, you'll notice every land makes green with one exception, and that's Plateau. It's because I have a copy, and it's basically just better than a mountain or plains. So it doesn't hurt anyone. It doesn't hurt me at all. Jetmir's Garden, Jungle Shrine comes in tapped, but it's a tri-land, so it's fine. Mosswort Bridge. This card is so good in this deck. Hideaway. When it enters the battlefield, taps, and when it does, you look at the top 4 cards of your library. You choose one of them to exile face down and put the rest on the bottom. This taps for a green, and as green tap, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater. 10 or greater does mean I need 3 creatures. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of stuff with 8 power, and 8 power plus my commander would be enough. So like when most of the things are 5 or 6, that means commander plus that isn't enough. It isn't gonna get me to the Mosswort Bridge. I need 2 creatures usually, which does matter. It does mean that like you don't want something that helps you build your board. You probably want something that compounds on your board to cast off of this, but it's just a free spell. It's pretty good. We got our basic lands. Taiga, Prismatic Vista. I do have all of the dual lands for this deck. Not necessary, but I have them, so I'm playing them. The check lands come in untapped. That's great. I have the shock land, so Stomping Ground, Temple Garden, but not Sacred Foundry. You notice? Sunpetal Grove. Temple of the False God helps us get to the kind of mana we need. As a note, though, unless your accelerants were this doesn't help you activate on turn 3, and it's only useful to activate on turn 4 if your accelerants were both natural or nature's lore and 3 visits. So it's not really good for the early get our engine going part, but later in the game, while we're trying to ideally we'd like to cast a creature and activate our commander in a turn. This helps us get there. But notice almost nothing comes into play tapped. We should probably cut these kind of dorky fetch lands. They're mostly in here because they used to be a lot better. Commander used to be a lot slower and used to be alright. It used to be okay to do that. You could get away with it. And the last card I haven't talked about is the one utility land in the deck, and that's Homeward Path. I don't actually have the Green Dragon inversion, but a friend of mine has a copy, and I want to trade him for it, so this is optimistic. Not every card that is in this list is the version I have. I tried to make them the version I have most of the time, but sometimes I didn't care enough. Taps for colorless. Tap, each player gains control of all creatures they own. Why is this here? This is here because I have the best creatures at the table. If there's someone who's trying to take other people's cards and play with them, they are taking mine. That has happened to me so many times. I'm like, you know what? We're playing Homeward Path. We need a solution to this. I don't have any way of finding it, which is a little unfortunate. So sometimes I do just have to hope that my deck delivers, but it's really important to have this effect in here. There are a couple other cards that do that. None of them are good enough. Brooding Saurion is a 4/4, so no. If there were a 5/5 with this effect, I would play it in the deck, no question. But the only creatures that do it are like a Trostani that's a 2/5, I think, and Brooding Saurion, which is a 4/4, and Green Dragon Inn. All right, so now Peachy's Keen is suggesting that I play Patron of the Orochi. I probably shouldn't look it up here because that will just add it to the deck. And, well, I guess I can add it to Considering. All right. Should be right here. Add to Considering. All right. Patron of the Orochi. 6 green, 7/7. The mana cost sometimes matters. We do occasionally cast our creatures, so it's important to note what am I getting for the cost. Snake Offering. You may play this card anytime you can play an instant by sacrificing a snake and paying the difference in mana between this and the sacrifice snakes. So, like, theoretically, we can sacrifice Sakura Tribe Elder to cast this for 6 at instant speed. That's obviously not why it's being suggested, but it's something to note. Untap all forest and all green creatures. Activate this ability once per turn. Maybe. That does help us. Oh, that's once each turn? Oh, that actually could be really good. So my first thought was like, okay, I guess we can activate our commander twice in a turn. And then I went, hold on. We could activate our commander, activate Patron, untap everything. Don't activate the commander again. Pass the next turn, activate our commander, activate Patron of the Orochi. It's kind of a male findable Seedborn Muse. It's a little different, but it is pretty close. And you're right, Peachy Keen. I do have a lot of forests. I would want to play a few more because you kind of need to have untapping 6 lands with this. So the only thing that I think the only apprehension I would have for adding it to the deck at the moment is I would want more non-basic forests, more like Temple Gardens and Stomping Grounds if I can. So I'll look into that off stream, but as a good suggestion, thank you. Pretty sorry on art though, makes it worth it for that alone. I mean, yeah. For those of you who don't know here, this is a card like, why would anyone know about this card? It's because I played during Cold Snap and I liked this card. Oh, it got reprinted, Commander 13? Alright, sure. It is an interesting art. At the beginning of each end step, each player gains control of all non-token permanents they own. For real, if this card were a 5/4, I would play it. Like, that's all that it would take. Oh, that's another thing. People will often suggest cards for this deck that are like a 4-mana 5/5. The thing is, when you're paying 4 mana for a 5/5, most of what you're getting is the stats and not the text box, and we're not getting much for the mana value. We're not casting this card. We're paying 6 for it. Our expectation is that we're paying 6 to get it off the top. If it's cheaper, in a way, we're wasting mana because we're not getting 6 mana worth of stuff out of our activation. We're getting 4 mana worth of stuff out of our activation. So actually, like 4 mana 5/5 is worse in this deck than 7 mana 5/5 because the 7 mana 5/5 has a better text box. But even still, even if this just had 1 more power and was generally like kind of worse to add to have in the deck in play than a lot of other stuff, you got a lot less mana value out of it. This effect is so important that I would play it. I've been trapped in the lizard's lair for days. It seems to regard me as its child and will not let me leave. Oh, is that the flavor text? I've been trapped in the lizard's lair for days. It seems to regard me as its child. It's a lot. Avar Borg, Northern Guide journal entry. Yeah, it's quite funny actually. Is he in the art? I don't see like a dude in there. It doesn't seem like it. That would have been very funny if they had that coordination of like, oh, hey, put like a dude in that brood and just have like, it won't let me leave. He might be if he is an owl deer. You know what? I suspect that Avar Borg is not an owl deer. But, who am I to say? Maybe he is. So that's the deck, and that's the thought process that goes into it. Someone had talked to me about being interested in building this deck. Just know, like, some of the concessions you have to make to deck building. You need 36 to 38 giant monsters. You can get away with like 35, 32. If I remember right, like 32, you were you at 32 you miss like 14% of the time. That's too high for my liking, but like if you like to play by the seat of your pants, like you can do that. Even like 34, you're like at 12 or 11.5% to miss. So you really need like 35 to 38 monsters. You also need you cannot really afford to miss lands. 38 lands, honestly, maybe I should play one more. I guess if I cut these fetch lands, I won't need to because I'll do a little less deck thinning. But you need 38 lands. I have 38 monsters. That's 76 slots gone. Poof, out of here. You also need all these accelerants. That's another what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plus like the I think we have two other or we have three others. So yeah, we have 10 2-mana accelerants. Gone. 86 slots. Just completely gone. You probably want some of the creature cheat and the eternal and the like Seedborn Muse or whatever. You just lose a lot of slots to the mandatory stuff. You don't have a lot of flex slots. That said, it does make it a little easy in that the deck is like practically built for you. You can make some other choices. There are some decisions you can change that like I personally don't agree with, but they are reasonable to consider. For one, you don't need these specific monsters. You can pick your own. You have a lot of choices there. You can pick whatever giant things you want. Some people like the Eldrazi Titans. I don't. Okay, sure. You also can change what your acceleration was. I've tried a version of this deck where instead of the 2-mana accelerants, I played like Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, Birds of Paradise, things like that. There are a couple of problems. One, they kind of come into play tapped in the sense that they don't make mana the turn that you play them. They're summoning sick. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but it ends up working out to be because remember, you want to accelerate twice by turn 4. So you still can. It's just like it needs to be on turns 1 and 3. Kind of specifically, you need to have them at that moment. Which with my build, I need them on turns 2 and 3, so it's not much different. But all right, they also get like swept up by a lot of like if someone wraths you, which they should be doing in this deck anyway, you lose a lot of your mana, which means you can't rebuild your board, you can't recast, you just can't cast monsters out of hand. You might be on 4 or 5 mana and just not operable. You can try it. I didn't like it. What about Greater Tanuki that brings the percent down? Sad to hit that off Mayo, but better than nothing. I used to have some cards like that. I don't know what that card is, so I'll look that up. But Greater Tanuki. This is what I think it is. I used to have cards like this. 6/5 trample, 2 and a green, discard it, search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. This is better than what I used to have. Well, I guess it's not better. So I used to play things like Corrosion Tusker, which I'm sure is the kind of card you're thinking of. And like, there's another Corrosion Tusker where it's 4 mana to activate, but it puts into play. It's from Amonkhet. I forget what the card is called. When you cycle it, you may search your life for a basic land card, put it in your hand, then shuffle. The difference is, like, the Tanuki puts it into play, which is nice, whereas the Tusker puts it in your hand. There are a couple of problems. One is that 3-mana acceleration or 4 mana with the, I think it's like Kefet something. I forget the name of the other creature. You often don't have time to activate an effect like this. You do if things are not so streamlined. If you miss on your double acceleration, you can throw in something like this. The problem is like deck space, because the way you boost the numbers on this is you'd have to cut a non-monster for something like Greater Tanuki, and I guess we found some cuts today. I didn't sort by tags. We found some cuts as we were talking about this. If we go to the chopping block section, but some of these are lands. I'm not cutting those. Some of these are monsters. Cutting those doesn't help us. So it basically we like replace one of these 3: the Lightning Greaves, Rhythm of the Wild Stalker, Tribe-Elder. Maybe I could. I guess I don't think I'd want to replace. I think it'd be like replace Lightning Greaves with something like Greater Tanuki. I used to play Valley ran it. Was another similar thing. It's just a 6/3. So yeah, it sucks to hit off a Mayael, but you hit something. The thing to think about is this is the backup case, right? You don't want to hit the Greater Tanuki or the Croatian Tusker or the Valley Ranet, but if that's the only thing, at least you didn't miss, and it does something else. So like this one has Mountain Cycling and Forest Cycling. Maybe Greater Tanuki specifically is good enough instead of something like Lightning Greaves, which is mostly here, by the way, to give Shroud to my commander. To be honest with you, or like Shroud to Avacyn or something. That's mostly what it's here for. Maybe like Rhythm of the Wild. I don't think it's worth playing something that bad to bump it by such a small percent. Because here's the thing. So I'm already at 38 monsters. If I put in the Greater Tanuki, I increase my percentage very, very little. Right? It goes to 92.4. We get 0.7% off of adding one more creature, and I don't think it's worth it with given how few flex slots we have. Now it's one of those like, well, maybe I can cut like Inferno Titan for it, but I think Inferno Titan is better than the Tanuki in either side of the Greater Tanuki, you know. So I used to play stuff like that. I don't think it has a place anymore. I really like Emissary of Grudges and Guardian Archon as replacements for Lightning Greaves. Let me see what those are. Emissary of Grudges. I haven't heard of this card. 5 in a red, 6/5. Okay, so we can find it off of Mayael. That's pretty big. Enters battlefield, secretly choose an opponent, so it's only for one player. Reveal the player you chose. Choose new targets for a spell or ability if it's controlled by the chosen player. If it targets you or a permanent you control, activate only once. I don't like this. It's one-time protection if I call my shot. Haste doesn't really matter. Flying is nice, but it's findable off of Mayael. I don't really... maybe, but I don't love it. And then what's Guardian Archon? If I could spell. 4 white. As it enters the battlefield, secretly choose an opponent. Reveal the player you chose. And this is a 5/5 flyer. Okay, so we can still hit this. You and target permanent you control each gain protection from the chosen player until end of turn. Activate only once. Yeah, I just don't like that it's a called shot. It's exactly one instance and it's a called shot. Lightning Greaves often makes people have to deal with it. Like I've put this on Avacyn and just like now you have to like figure out how to get rid of the Greaves and the Avacyn like before you can even try to get rid of the Avacyn. It just puts like an extra layer of protection. I think the Greaves will stay around for a long time, even though the haste part isn't what they're there for. If there were more things like Archetype of Endurance, I would be happy to put like one more of these in and then cut the Greaves or something. I don't know. And like the haste is sometimes relevant. I think I don't like those monsters. I appreciate the suggestions though. Peachy Keen. I think I'm mostly happy where I am. I very rarely miss. Right? It's less than 8% to miss or less than 9% to miss. Now when I do, sometimes it sucks. Sometimes it's pretty bad. There are occasions where you can get away with missing, for what it's worth. If a game is just in a kind of a stable place, there's not a lot going on, you can afford to miss once. Or if you're activating on everybody's turn because of Seedborn Muse, like you don't need. Who cares if you miss once out of the 6 times you activate in 2 turns or whatever. As far as issues with the deck that I've been experiencing, there are a few. This deck is weak to Wrath of Gods. There's no two ways about it. And like control decks in general would probably make quick work of this because you chain a Wrath of God into I have to counter 1 spell a turn out of you. It's pretty easy to handle. Another issue I've been having recently is kind of a weird one. Is that this deck was built to deal with people who are going to interact with me a lot. And I've been playing with people who don't. Now that sounds like a positive because now all the stuff I have of like, okay, I want to make sure I can build a board. Now they get turned into effects that make my board insane very, very quickly. The last time I played this deck, I think I had 32 power by like turn 7 or something, just because I cast a Sylvala Stampede and no one did anything. I was like, all right, well, here's enough power to kill people. And while that doesn't sound like a problem, the big thing is if after that a Wrath happens, I've spent all my resources. So while card advantage used to be the kind of thing that I didn't care very much about, I'm kind of thinking that maybe I should put a little bit in here. The thing I would tell people is that card draw isn't that valuable because I'm not emptying my hand. Even on turn like 6, 7, 8, 9 of the game, I'm very frequently sitting with 3 to 6 cards in my hand because I just don't cast that many spells. I'll play a land every turn, I'll play my Accelerant, but most of the time I'm activating my commander. So cards weren't that important, but now that I'm able to empty my hand a lot more, maybe I need to look at a little bit more of card draw. I don't want tons of it. And one of the things that you might think is like, oh, the Monarch can help with that, and I do have one card that cares about the Monarch, that gives me the Monarchy. The thing is, sometimes if I'm attacking, people can get the Monarchy back decently easily. I'm not that confident. Ooh, excuse me. I'm not that confident that I can hold on to the Monarchy unless things are going exceptionally well. This is why actually I'm a little skeptical of Dawnglade Regent. It's in here because I just need more of this effect, but I can't rely on it. It's definitely not as reliable as a bunch of other stuff. I believe I have some cards written down that I was thinking about adding to the deck that I didn't add to the considering here because I just went through the deck list. I didn't look at what cards were... Oh, okay. So some cards that I definitely need. I believe it's Kodama of the North Tree or East Tree. This card is Cuckoo Banana Bonkers. I just don't have a copy. Or more accurately, I only have one copy and it's better in a different deck. So as soon as my local game store acquires more, I will add more in there. But 6/6 reach. Reach, by the way, not irrelevant. Flying is actually a little bit hard to get for blocking. Or like blocking flyers is sometimes a weakness this deck has, so reach is pretty relevant. But that's not why it's here. It's here because whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent with equal or lesser mana value from your hand onto the battlefield. So I activate Mayael and I get like a Patron of the Orochi. I can put in like Gisela or something. That's another way of getting creatures into from my hand onto the battlefield. I just need another copy of this. I had a few more written down. Let me go through those. I think actually. Actually, that might have been it. I just want to double check what some of these cards are because I just have it written down. I forget what those are. Don't remember if this was one of them. Well, this is a green card, so maybe 3 green. When it enters the battlefield, return up to 3 target permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. And then the flip side is, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a permanent card from your hand to the battlefield. So this one's being considered, but I'm very uncertain about it. The idea is, I'll add it to my considering list before I start talking about it. The idea would be that the idea would be that I can flip this card pretty easily. Returning the three permanents is not that big a deal. I can get back like some fetch lands or something. But I can flip it pretty easily, and putting a permanent from my hand onto the battlefield is a pretty big deal. I'm not sure that it's actually good, but it is being considered at the moment. And I think there's a new card, but I'm not. Again, I don't remember if it's for this deck. Virtue of Strength. Oh, no, that's not for this deck. Okay. So there's some stuff that we could improve on and some stuff that we see like doesn't necessarily work. But I like where this deck is. I mostly just tinker with it from now on. One thing that's really cool about this deck is you get to... Every set that comes out, you can just be like, all right, search for all creatures that have 5 or more power that are within this color identity. Are any of these good? Cool, move on. You would not believe the number of creatures that would be insane in this deck, but have 4 power. So among those, there so there was a Primordial Cycle. I used to have Molten Primordial. And this card goes in and out every now and again. I'm like, is this good? Is this not good? I'm never sure. When it enters the battlefield for each opponent, you basically threaten one of their creatures. This is a really good card to play on your turn, and not so great on other people's turns, which is when you often get it. The green Primordial, whose name I'm forgetting. Also, I can't spell. The green Primordial, that card got banned. Sylvan Primordial is fair and balanced and it should not be banned. Okay, Fichikin. All right, listen, the mono green flare. It seems a little bit motivated reasoning for you to say that. Is first of all, 7 mana for a 6/8 reach is like already way better statted than anything else. Anything else in this cycle. I think they were all 7 mana, but this one's like a 6/8 reach. When it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, destroy target non-creature permanent that player controls. For each permanent destroyed this way, search your library for a forest card and put it on the battlefield tapped and then shuffle. This card was absolutely ridiculous, and I kind of get why it got banned. It was kind of not okay. The thing I was doing with it wasn't the thing that made it broken. I was just putting it into play or whatever. If you blink it a lot, it gets kind of nuts. I didn't love that it was mandatory, so if an opponent had only lands, you're just like, well, you gotta blow up one of your lands, and who cares that it's turn 4 and you're barely getting your feet underneath you. But yeah, this card, don't get to play anymore. But what about the white one? Oh, what's that? Maybe I forgot what the card is called. I could have sworn it was Luminarch Primordial. Luminate Primordial. When it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls, and that player gains life equal to its power. You get to Swords to Plowshares for each opponent. It's a 4/7. I don't get to play it. There are also different like themes that you can add to the deck that I haven't. One of those I thought of because of another card that I don't get to play. So you can play a dinosaur theme deck. There's a lot of dinosaur synergies, and dinosaurs are huge, so you can have that kind of stuff. I remember when these came out, like, oh, I don't get to play Zatalpa. Zatalpa's a 4/8. It's not that big a deal, especially not anymore. Like, this is mostly just a ball of stats and keywords, and probably wouldn't make the cut. At the time, what I was looking for out of creatures was a little less refined. But if you wanted to do dinosaur theme stuff, you can play like Gishath, and the problem is a decent number of dinosaurs are just balls of stats. So like Galta is basically just a 12. You can also play a dragon theme, and these could be like sub themes in your deck. So like Utvara Hellcart is a card I used to have, just because like the amount of stats you get was good enough at the time. I didn't even really have that many other dragons. Whenever a dragon you control attacks, make a 6/6 red dragon with flying. But then there's some stuff from Dragons of Tarkir, like oh no, it's not Dragon Lord Atarka. I think the original Atarka World Render, for example. I used to have this theme used to be in my deck. That's why I know about it. Is whenever a dragon you control attacks, it gains double strike until end of turn, and then you also have Dramoka Almond Fudge. Dramoka the Eternal. Whenever dragon you control attacks, bolster 2. And there are a few dragons like this. You can have that if you want. I moved off of it. It's not bad. I think I just prefer the like less tribal, more individually powerful, and more interactive stuff. Because you notice these are like good at getting power on the board, and I've decided to not go as hard into that as I could. The idea being I can get to enough power without going as hard as possible in that pursuit, and in exchange I get a lot of interaction disruption. So you can look into like there are lots of themes. This I think is the unthemed version. This is what I would call the unthemed um, interactive version of this deck, and I think it's pretty refined for what it is. Now, yes, you could play a lot more like powerful cards like Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, and that can help you cast these monsters. And if you're going like CEDH, this has no business being there, obviously. But for like casual games where you're trying to have a good deck that you can have fun with, and also you get to make interesting decisions, I think this is a really good deck. The way I describe it sometimes is that this deck is very stupid. All my creatures are big dumb dummies that are big and dumb, and I'm the one who gets to be smart to make up for it. These creatures are, they're big bruisery beefers. They're not they crash in, they turn sideways. That's the thing they do. What you do is you strategize with your army, which is a kind of a cool feeling. I know you can get that in a lot of decks, but it is how I feel with this. And also a little bit LARPy, but you know what? Hey, we play games because of how they make us feel, all right? And so what do I mean about you get to be smart about this deck? Obviously, you get to make some decisions of like, what creature do I want when? This is also why I have this specific selection of monsters, because it lets me make interesting decisions and lets me leverage my decision making of what is good here to improve my odds of winning the game, as opposed to just take the biggest thing with the most stats and hope it works out. I might make the decision that I want Archon of Valor's Reach over Apex Altasaur when I activate Mayael one game, because like, oh, my opponent doesn't really have creatures, and like I think they might be a combo deck or a control deck, and I want to turn off instants or sorceries or whatever. Or God forbid, this has happened before and it feels pretty gross. They're playing like Urza or some artifact deck. You can name artifact. I don't think I read this out. Flying Vigilance Trample 5/6. When Archon of Valor's Reach enters the battlefield, or actually, as it enters the battlefield. So when you put it in off of Mayael, they never have a moment where they can respond to this entering. There's never a priority window before it's named a thing. And once you choose artifact, enchantment, instant, sorcery, or planeswalker. Basically, any spell type other than creature or now battle, or I guess tribal. Players can't cast spells of the chosen type. If you play against an artifact deck and you name artifacts, they should probably pick up their cards. It is kind of unbeatable. And decisions like that are what I'm looking for. And so, okay, cool. That's the decision. That's what I want out of this deck, and that's why a lot of these decisions are here, or why a lot of these card choices are what they are. As far as that goes, that also means that you can, some of what you might be inclined to do is not so good. I've seen a lot of players play decks like this, where they're just like, oh, it's my turn, activate this at sorcery speed, put my giant thing into play. But the threat of activation with Mayael is way better than the actual activation most of the time. There will be a lot of situations where someone has like their 4/4 flyer and they're deciding who they attack. Do you want to attack me? If I hit a flyer out of this deck, it will be big enough to kill your 4/4, but you don't know if it's a flyer or not. Well, okay, if I activated it on my turn, they would know whether I have a flyer and they can know whether they attack me. But just not knowing, maybe they don't, and I gain 4 life effectively just because I haven't activated yet. And stuff like that is where you can make a lot of decisions, what you attack with, where, how safe you want to be, yada yada, etc. There's a lot of cool decisions, even though this is, some pretty Timmy magic. Another card, by the way, that I used to have and like is a reasonable option. This card comes in and out of the deck sometimes. It's Blazing Archon, 6 white, so pretty hard to cast. 5/6 flying, so pretty small, but its creatures can't attack you. This can be really good. I recently have found very infrequently that I want this effect, but something to keep in mind is knowing when your effects are relevant. That's why I wanted to mention this. Because when I had Blazing Archon in the deck, I would sometimes activate Mayael at the beginning of combat if I was worried about my opponent's attacks, because if I flip Blazing Archon, they just can't attack me. Cool. But because this isn't there, it's often better to wait to see what your opponent wants to attack with. Yeah, you can hit like Boros Battleshaper, but it's not really that worth it as compared to like ambushing their creatures in combat with like, oh, I have this Ruric Thar, or like I found Gisela or something, or Xenagos is a really great blocker. And and not knowing what you have makes it harder for them to attack. So most of the time I don't activate at the beginning of combat, rather in declare attackers, so that I can block with whatever I flip. Things like that. These are the kinds of decisions you get to make in the deck. Same is true when you're activating things like Elvish Piper. Same is true when you get like Defense of the Heart to pop. I'm a little sad that there is this like always good option of Archetype of Endurance plus Avacyn Angel of Hope. It kind of means that you don't have a lot of like this is my problem with tutors is you always get the same things, and with Defense of the Heart that's very true. With Worldly Tutor that ends up not being true. Most of the time I get something different from game to game because what I'm looking for is probably like what the thing does for this situation and not just like, oh, let's put Avacyn into play. But with Defense of the Heart, we often get Avacyn plus Archetype, and I kind of don't like that, but hard pressed to cut it, especially because getting a Defense of the Heart was kind of a pain. So now that I have it, I don't want to cut it or anything. Quicksilver Amulet maybe is like a little expensive or whatever. At this point, I think I've expressed all of the thoughts I have on the deck, and I hope this was interesting for you. I might do more of these. If people like these, I can do more deck techs of the stuff I have in the future. I would be kind of reluctant to do this for a deck that I haven't played for a long time and I'm not confident about. So like, a deck I built within the last 2 years or something, I might not do, but something I built, like 8 years ago. Okay, maybe I'll do that. So I hope this was really interesting for you. I'm not going to sign off here. I am going to end the recording though, so we can upload that separately. So bye YouTube.